Well, hello, good morning everybody. Welcome back. Jiu-Jitsu 2000 here today. I hope you guys are doing wonderful. I'm back. I've got an interesting video for you today. I am currently in New Mexico. I am at my parents' house. I am sitting inside of their RV. I came here to install some solar power on this RV, and the job turned out fantastic. So I'm going to share some of the details of that installation with you in this video. So this RV that I'm sitting in, it's a fifth wheel. I'm not sure what the length is, 24 footer, something like that. And it's a Dutchman 1993 model. But before I get to the solar, I want to show you this epoxy countertop that we did. Look at this. This turned out absolutely fantastic. So we took this table down and we epoxied it. Doesn't that look amazing? Epoxy is without a doubt one of my favorite things to do. So talking about the solar, I got a lot to talk about. I got some notes here, some little cheat cards that I've written out, and I want to talk about some of the stuff that we did. So these little cheat cards are just little notes that I've written out for my parents, and a few things that I wanted to talk about this build, about this solar project. So the first chart is just a cheat sheet, and it talks about fuses that you would run from your charge controller, the fuses that come in from the solar panels to the charge controller. Now, based on the size of the wire. So what I did was, that's a number 10 wire, so I used a 40 amp fuse for that. So this little chart, and you can get these ampacity charts in a lot of places, but I'll just run it down for you real quick in case it's something you might be interested in. If you're going to be running a 16 gauge wire, it'll handle an 18 amp fuse. 14 gauge will hold a 25 amp fuse. 12 gauge, you can go up to 30 amps. 10 gauge, again, that's what we used. You can fuse that to 40 amps. 8 gauge, 55 amps. 6 is 75 amps. Number 4 is 95 amps. Number 2 is 130 amps, and then all the way down to number 0 size wire, very thick stuff, 170 amps. Okay, so, and I'll talk about why I'm mentioning that here in a minute, why that's so important. So that's the little chart there. That's a little ampacity chart. Now the next thing that I wanted to do, when I did this install, we spent about $1,500, give or take a little bit of money. Okay, so I wrote down an itemized list of some of the things that we did. We ran 420 watts of solar on the roof. So we ran 2 Newpowa 210 watt monocrystalline solar panels. The reason I chose the monos versus the polycrystalline is because, from what I understand, when you have polycrystalline panels and it's an overcast day, they don't produce as much energy as monocrystalline panels do. So I selected monocrystalline panels. Again, Newpowa was the manufacturer. I got 2 of them. They're 210 watts each. I'll try to post links in the description box down below this video of all the things that we purchased. So those were about $200 a piece, so I got $400 in solar panels. Then I had 20 feet of number 10 UV resistant solar wire that had the MC4 connectors that goes from the panels on the roof down to the charge controller. Those wires were $32. We needed a charge controller, and we needed to determine what size charge controller to use. And that's where I use this other chart, which is finding out what size charge controller you should use. So it's basically whatever wattage that you want to run on your solar array, you divide that by the voltage that you're going to be running. So for example, a 200 watt solar array divided by 12 volts would mean 16 amps. So you would round that up to the next larger charge controller. So a 20 amp charge controller would handle 200 watts easily. 300 watts, again, divided by 12 volts comes out to 25 amps. And again, you want to always round that up to the next one. So for a 300 watt system, you'd need a 30 amp charge controller. 400 watts will give you 33 amp charge controller. But in our case, 420 watts divided by 12 volts equals 35 amps. So we rounded up to a 40 amp charge control. I'll talk about that again here in a second. So going down the list here, 470 watts divided by 12 volts gives you 39 amps. So if you had a 40 amp charge controller, the max that you could run, I would suggest, is 470 watts of power. 500 watts is 41 amps charge controller. So 500, you need a bigger charge controller, a 50 amp charge controller. 600 watts is the peak. That's the maximum that you could fit on a 50 amp charge controller. So again, for this build, we selected a charge controller made by Renogy. It's the Rover 40 amp MPPT, so multi-power point tracking, I think is what that stands for. It's not the pulse with modification, PWM. They don't work as good. MPPT is far, far superior. So you have the difference of monocrystalline panels, so you get the best of the panels, but then you also get the best version of the charge controller in the MPPT, and I chose Renogy, spent $150 on that. To run this whole system, this whole trailer, I looked at the fuse box down there, and even though the shore power plug-in is 30 amps, there's not 30 amps of capacity in this trailer. So I selected a 2,000 watt power inverter. So that's about 20 amps, roughly, okay, give or take a little bit. So we chose the Renogy 2,000 watt power inverter. And it came with some cables, and it was a pure sine wave inverter. That was $265. Now, we needed to run 3 deep cycle batteries. We chose lead acid liquid batteries, and we needed the cables to connect those batteries together, and you had the option of running them in series or running them in parallel. But for this build, everything that we've done on the installation of the panels as well as the batteries down below, and I'll show you all this, everything is wired in parallel. Okay, when you wire in parallel, you double the amperage, but you maintain the voltage. So since the solar panels are roughly 12 volts, give or take, I wanted to double the amperage and keep the voltage low. Same thing with the batteries. I had 3 12-volt batteries, and if I would have ran them in the series, it would have tripled my voltage to 36 volts. The power inverter wouldn't accept that high of a voltage, so I had to keep them at 12 volt, which meant I run these batteries in parallel. But I needed wires to connect the batteries to do that. So I chose number 4 wire, 2 of them, and they were $15 a piece, so a total of $30. Then on the roof where the solar panels come together, if I would have ran them in a series, I wouldn't have needed a branch connector. But since I ran them in parallel, I needed a branch connector. So that's on this list. That was about $8. There was 2 fusible links that were 10 gauge wire. One of them went on from the solar panels to the charge controller. So before that positive went to the charge controller, I cut in a fuse. So it's an inline fuse. And the other one was down below where the positive from the charge controller went to the battery bank. So I had 2 fuses. They were $8 a piece. They were inline, so a total of $16. Down below on the battery bank, I put a 12-volt socket, like what you would see a cigarette lighter socket, so that my pop could charge he's got this power thing for charging jump starting vehicles and stuff like that, and it plugs into a socket. So I got a socket and put it down on the batteries. I'll show you here in a minute, but that was $7. And up on the roof, I had to get 2 of the kits that are the solar panel brackets, because I didn't want to put any screws in the roof. I didn't want no potential for leaking. I wanted to glue the panels down, and so Those brackets are $34 a piece. It comes with all 4 corners and 2 side brackets on each kit. So we purchased 2 of those. That was a total $34 times 2. That was $68 in brackets. Now, to glue these panels down, I used Sikaflex to glue the panels down onto the roof. Okay, so the Sikaflex, I used 2 tubes of that at $19 roughly per tube, so $38 in Sikaflex. And this stuff is fantastic. So what we did was we got on the roof, and I had a little bucket of water, hot soapy water, and I had a couple rags, and I took the scrub brush and I scrubbed the roof down very clean so that the Sikaflex and the brackets and everything would have a good bond to the roof, and it turned out amazing. So after the hot soapy water went away and I dried the area with rags, then I took denatured alcohol and I rubbed the areas where the brackets were going to be, where the solar panels were actually going to touch down, where they were going to stick. So I took a Sharpie and I marked those spots so that I knew exactly where the solar panels were going to sit, and I really cleaned really good on those areas. So again, $38 in total on Sikaflex. That stuff is fantastic. Now the 3 deep cycle lead acid batteries that I told you about, we decided to put them down below underneath this seat. Those were about $110 a piece. So a total of $330 for the lead acid batteries. There's one more thing on the list here. That was the weather head. That is the part that allows the wires to come through. That's the one hole that you'll drill in the ceiling or in the roof to allow the wires to come from the outside to the inside. That was $10, but we didn't use that, and I'll show you why we didn't here in a little bit. Now, in total, this build was $1,354. So I'll shine that up, get that close to the camera, and hopefully you can see those numbers and everything there. That was the itemized list of what we purchased. This is everything that I chose to select for this build. They didn't know anything about solar, so they left everything to me, and I ordered all this stuff, and it's turned out fantastic. So there's one more chart that I wanted to talk about, and we had a problem. And a second ago, I was talking about fuse sizes based on wire. Okay, so when I came down to the batteries, there was some thick wires that went from the batteries to the power inverter. Again, that's 2,000 watt Renogy pure sine wave inverter. So when I went down to the number 4 wire on the chart there, you see that number 4 was good for 95 amps. So I put a 95 amp fuse. So I had a total of 3 fuses. I had one from the solar panels positive coming into the charge controller. There was 1 fuse. The second fuse was from the charge controller positive going down to the battery bank. And the third fuse was from the battery bank to the power inverter. That was a number 4 gauge wire. So again, by the ampacity chart, that says that you would run a 95 amp fuse. So I put a 100 amp fuse down there and installed that down there, a bolt-on fuse, and it worked okay. But I noticed that the system had a heavy draw of amperage, and I was like, "What the hell?" And the batteries were going down. So I couldn't figure out what was going on. So my mom had this book, Solar Power for Dummies. She just happened to have it, and she said, well, maybe you can look in that book. Maybe there's something in there that you might find that might help. And I did find the answer. What I did was I actually created a bottleneck, and all the current was trying to flow through that 100 amp fuse. But this next formula that I'm going to give you is fantastic, and this formula is what really opened up the system. So instead of running a fuse to protect the power inverter based on the size of the wire, there's a formula where you can select the size of the fuse that protects the power inverter based on the wattage that the power inverter pulls. So to figure that out, you take the wattage and you divide that by the voltage, and that gives you the amperage of what fuse to run for that wire. So for example, a 2,000 watt power inverter divided by 12 volts comes out to 166 amps. 2500 watts, which is what I selected, gives you up to 208 amps of fuse. 3000 watts, 250 amp fuse. 3500 watts, 291 amp fuse. And 4000 watts gives you a 333 amp fuse. Now the reason I selected 2500 watts as my formula to come up with the fuse size is because this power inverter goes 2000 watts continuous, but it'll peak all the way up to 4000 watts. I didn't want to go to 4000 and put a 333 amp fuse in there because I still want to protect the power inverter. So I selected 2500 watts because I know that it won't run that continuous. I selected that, and that was 208 amps. So I ended up putting a 200 amp fuse on the line that goes from the battery bank to the power inverter. Again, I'll show you here in a minute, but this is the chart right there. And that was a lifesaver. So those are all the formulas and things right there that I've written up for this build. And it worked fine. As soon as I put that 200 amp fuse in there, the system like took off and it was charging like crazy, working fantastic. The next thing that I wrote down was a list of appliances that show the amperage or the wattage draws. And I wrote this cheat sheet down so my mom and my pop can look at this cheat sheet and kind of get an idea and gauge what kind of things that they can run on this system. So for example, the AC cooler up above, I noticed that that cooler draws 8.5 amps. Now, if you want to take and you want to figure out how many watts that is, if you have the amperage and you multiply that by the voltage, that'll give you the wattage. So 8.5 amps divided by, in my case, I used 120 volts, gives me 1020 watts. Now, if you have the wattage of something and the voltage of something, but you don't know what the amperage is, you can take the wattage of the item, divide it by the voltage, and that'll give you the amperage. So again, in this case, if you had the cooler and you knew that it was 1020 watts, you could divide that by 120 volts and find out that that cooler draws 8.5 amps. So the refrigerator right here next to me, 3.5 amps or 420 watts. The microwave up here, hopefully you can see that up in the camera there. That microwave, that's one of the biggest draws on this system. 12 amps or 1440 watts. Now pressure cooking with the Instant Pots, there's two different Instant Pots that we use. We use a 6-quart and we also use a 3-quart. The 6-quart draws 8.3 amps or 1000 watts. And the 3-quart, the smaller one, draws 5.8 amps or 700 watts. So very cool. My mom loves her coffee, her and my pop. So they have a little 12 cup coffee maker that draws 8 amps or 980 watts. My mom has this little glass lid. It's like a slow cooker, almost like a crock pot kind of thing. 2.5 amps or 310 watts. There's also a toaster that my mom wants to use once in a while, 10.7 amps or 1290 watts. That the toaster actually takes more energy than the cooler, which is crazy. Waffle maker that she had, very cool waffle maker, 8.3 amps or approximately 1000 watts. So that would be about the same as a 6-quart Instant Pot. Now she had a little stereo, a little boom box, a little Sony boom box, 1 amp at the most. It was only 10 watts, so you can run that thing all day. My personal laptop, which is a very high-end gaming laptop, it only draws about 1 amp. And just sitting there running, if the battery is already charged on the laptop, it only draws like 20 watts. But if I'm charging the laptop, if the battery was low and it's charging, then it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 watts. The blue 1000 watt peaks at 2000 watt Blue Eddy, that thing takes approximately 2 amps to charge, about 250 watts. Now if you have a device and you're not sure what the wattage or amperage is on the device and you want to know, you can use the little thing called a kilowatt. That's a little device that you plug into an outlet, and you plug whatever item you want to find out what the draw is. You plug that into the kilowatt, and then you turn on whatever the item is, and the kilowatt will display numbers in voltage, amperage, or wattage. So in our case, whatever formula, whatever of the three things, voltage, wattage, or amperage, if you got one of the three, you can figure out the other one. So I use it for wattage personally, and I'll see how many watts something draws. So that's basically the cheat sheet and the information that I have for you. So let me move this little table and move this stuff, and I'll get you looking down here at these batteries. So bear with me. I'm going to move this table out of the way. These RVs are pretty cool. There we go. Let's move that out of the way. That epoxy job turned out fantastic. It was very easy to do and a lot of fun. So right here is where I chose to put the batteries. And let me go ahead and open this bad boy up, and we will take a look. There's a little stick here. Just like that. Let's get that bad boy. And now we'll come down here and we'll take a look at the work down here. So as you can see, we have 3 deep cycle batteries. I didn't want these batteries touching, so I built a small framework using this wood to keep the batteries away from each other. Now these are those wires that I was telling you about, which allows me to run these batteries in parallel, which means all the negatives have to be together and all the positives have to be together. So that's what I did. I ran them in parallel. And then right here, that's the 2000 watt Renogy pure sine wave inverter. And then these are those big thick number 4 wires that I was telling you about. And remember when I mentioned through that formula, we found that a 200 amp fuse works absolutely fantastic here. And we have a spare just in case you need a spare fuse. So that works really good. Now this red wire here is the wire that comes from the charge controller, and this wire you can see is fused. That's that number 10 gauge fused wire that feeds this battery bank. Okay, now the negative comes up here. You only have to fuse the positive side of these wires. So what I did was I used a little connector there, and I shrink. It was one of those shrink, so you crimp the connector and then you just heat it up and it shrinks down. So this is a number 10 gauge wire. This wire looks a little thinner because it has thinner insulation. This wire here that my thumb is touching is also number 10 gauge, but it's just got thicker insulation, and that's the wire that's actually coming out from the panels. That was just some leftover wire that I had. So I put that fuse there, so in the event that anything pops, you can always check that fuse right there. So very cool install. This is the NOCO. This is a fused link also. This is that 12 volt outlet that I was telling you about that my pop will have here, so that he can charge his little battery thing. So he's got just a little 12 volt outlet right there. And it comes directly off of the batteries. And it works fantastic. And that's also fused, so if that fuse pops or anything happens, that is protected. Okay, right here you can see this little thing here taped to the battery. That is a temperature sensor, and that goes up to the charge controller, and it tells the charge controller what temperature the battery banks are. And this system just works out fantastic. Right here you have a pigtail that plugs into the back of the power inverter, and on the other side of that pigtail is basically the shore plug-in for the trailer. Now you see a little phone line kind of looking wire down there, that little gray wire. That is a remote switch that turns on and off the electricity basically. It turns on and off this power inverter. So you have the option of turning this off manually, you can turn it on manually, or you can put it in remote and use that phone wire to come up here and turn this thing on and off right there using that switch. So right here is the charge controller that I installed. This is the Renogy. This is a 40 amp multi-point power tracking, I think is what that stands for, charge controller. As you can see right now, the batteries are at 100%. You've got your solar light flashing telling me, I think, that the batteries are in boost mode. You got your second indicator, which is your batteries. Your third indicator is your load, which we didn't install a load here. And then the fourth indicator here is an error indicator. So if you get any kind of errors, that fourth light will illuminate. Now this little plug-in right here, that's the one that goes to the temperature sensor that you saw taped to the batteries. These two wires right here are the input from the solar panels, and these two wires are the ones that go to the battery bank. So this red wire that comes from the charge controller is this wire right here, and that's the one that I fused. Okay, just to give you a visual, that's the red wire that's the coming from the charge controller going to the batteries. This other red wire is the positive coming from the solar panels, which is this guy right here. And as you can see, I installed another fuse here. So in the event that you have any kind of problems with the solar panels up above, this will pop this fuse and protect the charge controller, and vice versa. This wire is protected from the battery bank. If you have problems with your batteries, it'll pop down below right there, and it won't damage your charge controller. Now this charge controller has several functions that you can scroll through. So right there you can see the voltage of the batteries, 14.7 volts. And then you go right there. This is the load amperage, which we don't have no loads installed right here. See, there's nothing there. So we'll scroll past that. And 6 amp hour. There's another thing about the load. 18 degrees Celsius is the current temperature of the batteries. And 15, I'm not sure what that means. This is the error. So if you have any error codes, you'll see that illuminate right there, which we did have an error code at one point. We had an E3, and we looked it up in the book, and E3 was low battery voltage. That was when we were testing and doing a big draw and everything like that. We drew the batteries down. Now it's very important to not allow your batteries to drop below 50%. These are lead acid batteries. If you let them get too low, you will cause damage to your batteries, so you don't want to do that. So that's the main screen right there. You do have to find this setting right here. You see that little battery. If you push and hold this button, you'll see that that little battery will flash, and then you can cycle through different types of batteries. It gives you different options, so you want to make sure that you're on the right type of battery. So for lead acid batteries, we're choosing the flood option. 12 volt is our voltage. Up there you can see the sun is out. There's our solar panels. The batteries are already charged, so we're not having any input coming into the battery bank, which is right there in the center. It's fully charged. That is the current voltage of the batteries. And when I turn the power on right here with this switch, that turns on the power inverter, and it also turns on the power in the whole trailer. So when I do that, it pulls a small draw, because the battery for the 12 volt battery on board, not one of these 3 down below, but the 12 volt that comes with the trailer is being charged right now. So as you can see, the voltage drops a little bit, and you can see now that we are bringing in solar power back to the batteries. But the part that I like to leave this screen on is the percentage one. Now, one thing that you want to remember when you're looking at this screen, anytime you have voltage moving, whether it's coming in from the panels or going out as a load, anytime you have voltage moving, you got to be careful because it'll give you false numbers. So now that that switch is on, that's that little phone wire that goes down to the power inverter. Now that that switch is on, this whole system, this whole trailer is live. So if I wanted to come over here, for example, you can see the microwave. If I want to turn the microwave on for 3 seconds, you see the microwave works. All the lights, the cooler, everything works. Refrigerator, everything. I can come in here to the bathroom area, turn on this light, just like this, and fans, whatever you need, it's all going to work. Now, I'm coming into this closet for a second because I want to show you something. And there's this little triangle piece of wood right here, okay? Behind that triangle piece of wood, there's a vent. There's a pipe that vents the toilet. We got lucky. We didn't have to use the weather head because we snuck down our wires down this pipe, brought them down to about here, and then I shot a hole because I took this panel off. I brought the wires down the pipe. I'll show you in a minute when we get on the roof. But I brought the wires through, I drilled a hole in this vent pipe, and then I shot the wires straight into the back through what you saw them coming through the wall into the charge controller. And then after I pulled the wires down and things like that, so I didn't have to drill any holes in the roof at all. I came through an existing pipe as a vent pipe. After I pulled the wires through and I got them connected into the charge controller, I put some silicone on the remainder of the hole so that there's no fumes or vapor or anything coming out. And then I put this back, and you can see how clean of a job. There's no wires showing at all. These wires are completely gone. I noticed when I was in here that this plywood for this closet was bad, so I cut a new piece of plywood, put that in there. But that is a very clean job. So that's where the wires came in, was through that vent. So it turned out fantastic. So now we're going to turn this light off, and we will go up on the ladder and we will take a look at the solar panels on the top. So once again, I know I've already showed you this, but I'll show you one more time just for good measure. That's what the batteries look like. So that's the whole system. I got some zip ties down there and a couple little basic tools. There is the power inverter, pure sine wave. And then again, that phone line, that goes to the on-off switch. The pigtail, and then I drilled this hole using a hole saw. And the pigtail, there's a door that you can access from the outside of the trailer down there through that big hole that I drilled. And my pop has an extension cord for the trailer. So in the event that he wants to plug into shore power, all he has to do is unplug from the pigtail, plug in the extension cord, and run the trailer off of power. So very cool. But this whole system is just fantastic. And I love this option of having a remote turn on and off the power. That just works very good. And these panels recover this battery bank very quickly. They work fantastic. So let me go ahead and get outside, and I will show you the solar panels, my favorite part of this whole build, because that's what we're here for, right? We're here to see solar panels. It's a little windy today, so warning, you might get a little bit of wind noise. So let's take a look. Let's get outside here, climb up this ladder, and boy, these are a little bit dirty. There is a look at the solar panels. So Newpowa 210 watt, Newpowa 210 watt. They are ran in parallel, and this is what those brackets look like. Remember, they were $34 a piece, and you get a total of 6 brackets. So you get all 4 corners and both sides per bracket. So the wires came through, and I ran them down that vent right there. I pulled one of these screws out, I put a little cable tie right there, and put some Sikaflex there, and it works fantastic. But that's the bond that holds these panels to the top of this trailer, and they are very solid. They ain't going nowhere. This build just turned out fantastic. It's very windy out right now, but that's what it looks like. I like these brackets because it gives you a little gap underneath the panels so they can breathe. You don't have, there's another bracket, I don't know if you can see it inside there, but this little strip of screws, there's another bracket that I have the wires tied down to underneath, and then underneath there, that's where my branch connectors are. But again, in total, 420 watts of solar. They also have solar for their well right here. They have 1 kilowatt right there for their well, so it's pretty crazy. So that's about it, folks, for this solar build for this trailer. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a lot of fun. Those cheat sheets are fantastic. With all that being said, folks, I hope this video helped you out. If you guys have any questions or comments or anything, please feel free to leave them down below. I will also post links in the description box so you can find all of the items that I put on this build. Again, I'll give you one more look at that itemized list right there. Hopefully you can see that. And then here is the chart of the amperage draws of some of the items, and you can go online and you can find charts similar to that which give you general numbers of draws for certain appliances and things like that. So again, folks, with all that being said, I want to say thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you got some good, useful information out of this video. Please feel free to leave comments, like this video, share this video, and until next time, have a beautiful day. We'll see you then. Bye for now. Go install some solar. Thanks for watching. Bye. Look at that epoxy. That turned out fantastic. That is a beautiful table. That was a fun project.